He walked with Abraham, heard the promises, and saw the angels, and yet he chose Sodom. This is the hidden story of Lot, a man caught between faith and compromise, salvation and smoke. When judgment fell, it wasn't just the city that burned. It was everything he built. What do you do when you survive the fire but lose your future? Long before fire fell from the sky, before a city burned under the weight of its own wickedness, there was a man who made a simple choice. His name was Lot, the nephew of Abraham, a man who walked closely enough with the chosen patriarch to witness firsthand the promises of God. The altars built in the wilderness, the voice that called Abraham out of Ur. Lot had seen faith up close. He had traveled beside it. He had benefited from it. But in a quiet moment, when opportunity and comfort appeared on the horizon, Lot made a decision that would define the rest of his life. It wasn't a sinful decision, at least not on the surface. It was a practical one, logical even. When conflict arose between his herdsmen and Abraham's, and the need to separate became clear, Abraham gave Lot first choice. And Lot looked out across the land, saw the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley, green, lush, well-watered like the garden of the Lord, and he chose it. But the land he chose was near Sodom, and that single choice, seemingly wise, economically advantageous, comfortable, placed him one step closer to fire. This is where the hidden story of Lot truly begins. Not in the ashes of Sodom, but in the quiet calculations of preference over promise. While Abraham looked to heaven and settled in Canaan, Lot fixed his eyes on earth and pitched his tents near a city infamous for its wickedness. And as time passed, the line between near and within began to blur. The next time we see Lot, he is no longer living near Sodom. He is living inside it, not as a criminal or a mocker of God, but as a citizen, a man who has built his home among the perverse, trying to survive without becoming one of them. He is not portrayed as evil. In fact, the New Testament calls him righteous Lot. But righteousness, when placed too long next to corruption, begins to fade in influence. And this is the tragedy of Lot. Not that he was wicked, but that he was passive. Lot had seen the God of Abraham work. He had walked alongside promise. And yet, when faced with the opportunity to prosper, he chose by sight rather than by covenant. His eyes saw the beauty of the valley, but not the darkness of the culture. He valued security over separation. He prioritized provision over position. And while Abraham built altars, Lot built a household in a city destined for judgment. There is no record of Lot evangelizing his neighbors, praying on their behalf, or pleading with them as Abraham once pleaded with God. Instead, Lot became silent. Surrounded by sin, he chose peace over truth. He survived, but never truly stood. It is a sobering reminder. Not every fall begins with rebellion. Some begin with a quiet, unchallenged compromise. Lot's story is not one of dramatic evil, but of spiritual drift. He walked beside greatness only to settle for normalcy. He knew the God who called fire from heaven, but lived as if fire would never fall. And in doing so, Lot teaches us something painfully relevant, that one can be near the presence of God, even rescued by his mercy, and still live a life that leaves behind nothing but smoke. Lot had settled in Sodom. Whether gradually or in a single decision, the man who once pitched his tents outside the city now sat at its gate, a place typically reserved for elders, judges, or respected citizens. It seemed Lot had not only adapted to the city, but had gained status within it. And yet, what kind of status was it? Was he respected for his integrity, or merely tolerated as a quiet outsider? Whatever the case, his presence there spoke volumes. Lot was a man who had chosen proximity over purity. He had chosen to live among the wicked in silence, hoping, perhaps, to survive without being stained. Then, one evening, two strangers arrived. Lot recognized immediately that they were no ordinary men, and with a mixture of reverence and urgency, he invited them into his home. He begged them not to stay in the public square overnight, painfully aware, of what kind of evil walked those streets once the sun went down. It was a disturbing moment. The righteous man knew his city was dangerous, but he still called it home. And when the darkness fell, Sodom revealed itself fully. The men of the city surrounded Lot's house, not a few, but all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old. They demanded the visitors be brought out, not for hospitality, but for abuse. The corruption was not private, hidden behind closed doors. It was public, celebrated, violent, and total. Lot stepped outside, desperate. He shut the door behind him and pleaded with the mob. What follows is one of the most difficult and tragic moments in all of Scripture. Lot, in an effort to protect the strangers, offers up his own daughters to the crowd. It is a gesture of misplaced honor and twisted desperation. We are meant to recoil. This is not courage. This is collapse. Lot had lived so long in a city that did not fear God that even his sense of morality had become distorted. He still believed in protecting the innocent, but he had lost the clarity to know what justice really looked like. The crowd, enraged, turned on him. "Who are you to judge us? You're just a foreigner." In that moment, Lot discovered the brutal truth. He had lived among them, perhaps hoping to influence them quietly, but in the end, he had no moral authority. He was neither one of them nor different enough to stand apart. He had tried to live into worlds, and both rejected him. Then the strangers revealed their true nature. They were angels, sent by God not merely to visit, but to warn. They struck the men with blindness and pulled Lot back inside. But what followed next was even more telling. The angels told Lot to flee. "Get out, take your family, judgment is coming." And Lot hesitated. He who had seen the depravity of the city, who had just witnessed divine power, who had been warned by angels, still clung to something in Sodom. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was the life he had built. Perhaps he didn't believe the destruction would really come. But his hesitation reveals something dangerous. You can be warned by God, even shown signs and wonders, and still be so entangled with the world that you struggle to leave it behind. The angels had to take him by the hand and drag him, his wife, and his daughters out of the city. It was not their strength that saved them. It was God's mercy. This is the quiet tragedy of Lot's life, that even when rescued, he was reluctant. Even when warned, He doubted. Even when surrounded by evil, he had made peace with it. His story is not the story of rebellion, but of slow compromise. He was not a man of war, but a man of delay. And in Sodom, delay meant death. His wife, still tethered to the life they left behind, turned to look back, and in that moment, she became a pillar of salt. Frozen, facing what once was, consumed by her longing for a world God had already condemned. And as fire rained down from heaven, consuming the valley in divine wrath, Lot fled into the mountains, a man saved from the flames, but with nothing left. The fields he once admired, the house he built, the influence he held, all gone. In the end, his choice had led him not to prosperity, but to ashes. And from those ashes, a haunting truth rises. It is possible to survive judgment, but still lose everything you built. Outside of God's will, Lot escaped the fire, but not the consequences. The judgment of Sodom was complete. The skies had opened with sulfur and flame, and the once fertile valley now lay in ruins. What was once green and thriving was now scorched and silent. Lot had survived, but everything familiar was gone. His wealth, his home, his status, all reduced to ashes. His wife, once his companion through the deserts and cities, now stood frozen in salt, a tragic monument to divided loyalties. And now, with only his two daughters, Lot fled to the mountains, not out of strength or clarity, but fear. He chose to dwell in a cave, a dark, lonely place. From the city gates to a hole in the rock, from leadership in a thriving city to hiding in obscurity. This was not triumph. It was survival soaked in sorrow. Inside that cave, something even darker unfolded, something that generations would remember, but few would speak of. The daughters of Lot, seeing no hope for a future, no men to marry, no lineage to preserve, devised a desperate and shameful plan. One night at a time, they made their father drink wine until he was unaware of himself, and one by one they lay with him, not out of lust, but out of fear and a twisted sense of necessity. What they did was not righteous, but what led them to it was not entirely born of evil either. It was born of trauma, isolation, and a worldview shaped by the city they had once lived in. Sodom had burned, but Sodom had entered their hearts long before that. The sons born from those nights would go on to become nations, Moab and Ammon. These names would echo through the pages of Scripture, not as allies of Israel, but often as enemies. They would war with the descendants of Abraham, clash with the chosen people, and introduce idol worship and immorality into the region. And yet, ironically, their blood carried the DNA of both survival and promise, because through Moab would eventually come a woman named Ruth, and through Ruth, King David, and through David, the Messiah. But that redemption would come generations later. For Lot, the aftermath was silence. He fades from the biblical record after that cave. No more interventions from God. No more visions. No more legacy. He lived, but left no altar, no testimony, no recorded words of worship or wisdom. Just the memory of a man who once walked beside Abraham and ended up in the shadows, not because he rejected God, but because he chose to live on the edge of judgment, believing he could handle the fire without being burned. Lot's end is not marked by rebellion, but by obscurity. He teaches us something terrifying, that you can be saved and still lose your story, that you can escape destruction and still carry its residue into the next generation, that it's not just about being rescued from Sodom, but about getting Sodom out of you. Because the ashes are not just what's left behind, sometimes they follow you. And if you're not careful, they settle into your bloodline, into your memory, into your cave. The story of Lot does not end with his death. It lingers like smoke after a fire. While Abraham's story stretches into legacy, promise, and the building of nations, Lot's legacy fades into silence and conflict. Two men walked out of her, both blessed, both exposed to the voice of God, both offered the opportunity to follow. But one walked in faith and the other in nearness. That difference made all the difference. Abraham built altars. He interceded for others. He lived as a foreigner, trusting in promises that hadn't yet materialized. Lot built tents near wickedness. He stayed silent when he should have spoken. He moved towards safety, not calling. And while both were shown mercy, only one became the father of a holy nation. The other, saved, yes, became a warning. The contrast between these two men is not just historical. It is deeply spiritual, a mirror for us. Many of us, like Lot, are not rebels. We don't curse God. We don't mock truth, but we settle. We live too close to compromise. We tolerate what grieves the spirit. We keep our faith private, thinking silence is safety. We become citizens of Sodom in every way but name. And when judgment comes, in whatever form, we run, not with confidence, but with confusion. We survive, but barely. We are saved, but scorched. Lot's story is not simply a moral tale. It is a spiritual map. It tells us what happens when we choose by sight, live by proximity, and ignore the slow drift of our soul. It warns us that comfort is not always God's blessing, that the lush valley can be a grave, that just because you survived the fire doesn't mean you fulfilled your purpose, and that one quiet compromise today may birth generational consequences tomorrow. But hidden even in Lot's shadow is a whisper of redemption, because God, in His mercy, did not abandon him. Angels came. His life was spared, and generations later, through the line of Moab, came Ruth, and through her, David, and through David, Jesus. That is the paradox of grace. God can redeem even what began in compromise. But make no mistake, redemption doesn't erase the pain. It transforms it. Lot teaches us that the path of least resistance is not the path of greatest reward. That escaping judgment is not the same as walking in destiny. That silence in the face of sin is not holiness, but hesitation. So the question remains, which story are we writing? Are we choosing like Abraham, eyes on the unseen, walking by faith, or are we settling like Lot, pitching our tents near the edge, hoping the fire never reaches us? One builds altars, the other builds regret. One births nations, the other hides in caves. And when the smoke clears, when all that was built outside of God is gone, only one legacy will remain, the one that trusted not in sight, but in the word of the living God. Lot's story is not about evil, it's about erosion, and that's what makes it dangerous. It doesn't shout, it whispers. Not every fall begins with rebellion. Some begin with comfort. So ask yourself, are you standing with Abraham on the mountain or living with Lot in the valley? Because the ashes always tell the truth.